Who should be more concerned for the rest of the season? Teams with Ronald Jones or teams with Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. He is Jordan McNamara. I am Chad Parsons. And that and other topics to be defined on this show. Busy week, whether it's waiver wire, the churn, the weekly churn at running back, as well as some potential big, historical buy low opportunities with certain players. We saw it with Juju Smith-Schuster potentially a few weeks ago, AJ Green in that same time period. There potentially is another wide receiver this week or maybe even the rest of the season or into January, Jordan. We'll get to him in a minute. But back to Ronald Jones, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we've got Leonard Fournette healthy, rising, where we were, a month ago? And now we've got Le'Veon Bell on, gauge how much did you expect him to be used in that first game back? And now, what is he on track to do? So who do you sort of have less confidence in, Ronald Jones or Clyde Edwards-Helaire, in terms of looking at from now till the rest of the fantasy season if both backs in those backfields are healthy?
I'm scared of them both, Chad. I don't really have a good.
I know.
I guess here's what my. I guess I would say Fournette is. I read today that they want him to be the receiving back, and just think about that statement 18 months ago, right? Like, just think about how crazy that statement would be. Oh yeah, a Tom Brady led offense is gonna have Leonard Fournette as their lead,
as the James White.
Right, in the James White role, and you'd wait. What where are we? Well, that's how weird this year's been. That's
rewind to July. Wasn't everyone on Dario Gumbawale? Like they're, oh my gosh, he's going to be a thing. He's going to catch 90 passes.
Right, and Fournette was going to catch 90, get 90 targets from Minshew. Right, so how far we've come. Listen, I thought Ronald Jones looked really good when Fournette was out, like really good. And this is coming from two people that. Can't speak for you on how good you thought he looked this year, but coming from two people that him coming into college were not fans and had come around on him. But now, again, this is the problem, right? I wonder if this situation is not going to pop up more and more because we're actually saturated right now with really good running backs throughout the NFL. And we go back a few years and there was just a dearth of talent, right? And that's when really the dynasty marketplace went to being very receiver heavy early on just because there weren't a lot of good running backs. Well, now you sort of have a lot of these situations where you have really good running backs and then their backups are really good or they're in really good two-headed committees, right? And and you just sort of wonder if that's something that we're just going to see more and more of, and that these not that teams are going to more of a running back by committee, this is optimized, but just because the talent disparity between 1 and 2 isn't as big as it's been in prior years.
A team could have a couple of running backs that are within their top 4 skill position players on offense.
Right. And just with how good these classes have been, right? And now you're getting guys like, you get Bell who hits the market and Kansas City snags him up. And then you sort of look at, we make that argument, then we can laugh and look at the Jets and they've got, no one that would be a third on anything better than a third on most teams. So, but yeah, I mean, the Fournette comes back and had basically had seen one snap in the past 2 weeks. If memory serves, he was active in emergency capacity only in 2 of those weeks, I believe. But then comes back this week fully ready to go, 56% of snaps to 43% for Ronald Jones. And Ronald Jones was up north of 50%, up north of 57% in 3 out of the 3, and all 3 of the weeks that Fournette really didn't play. So this is back to the last time we saw Fournette leading the snaps ahead of Ronald Jones was week 2. And then week 3 is when Ronald Jones had a go week. So I don't know how I feel good. I guess the thing that I feel best about is, all right, if we know that they're actually going to use Fournette in a receiving centric way, at least that's definable value. I guess at least you can sort of have an idea of what to project. Now, whether that'll actually be true or not is a whole different story.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Fournette is a big talent threat, that he is one we've seen what he can do. Le'Veon Bell, I think to some greater degree, we have more questions about the last time we saw him be really good, now again, that could be torpedoed by the Jets situation, etc. But the last time we saw him really good, it's been a while. It's been a lot longer than Fournette. So that would be one limitation that we would have comparing those two, but also coming through a prism of, in terms of leading through the running back position, and you've mentioned this, follow the money, right? That the Chiefs are, with Edwards-Helaire, that it was kind of a folly to say that he's going to be the center point of the offense. It's Mahomes. It's Tyreek Hill. It's all their weapons in the passing game that they've paid a ton of money for. That I think, again, and this isn't just me going on the soapbox of Edwards-Helaire, of he hasn't looked that great. And especially for what they got him for, which was Brian Westbrook, LaShawn McCoy, or whatever, whatever version of dynamo pass catcher extraordinaire, and we'll mix him in a little bit as a runner. Like, that really hasn't been the takeaway from how he's been used so far. And Le'Veon Bell, like, to me, this would worry me a lot if I were an Edwards-Helaire starter and GM of him on my dynasty team, because Le'Veon Bell, yes, it was a blowout. And yes, it was a snow-centric. Don't really have to do a whole lot. We can grind away, and they didn't really open things up. Let's just say it was very controlled in how they went around that route. But I think Le'Veon Bell, the fact this is almost like Devonta Freeman, right? Let's circle back, right? Because I know we had a conversation between us about, it'll be Deion Lewis for 2-3 games, and they'll kind of slowly ramp up Devonta Freeman. And I'm not comparing the same situation, but what I'm saying is, when you get a good player coming in that's been in the league a while, they can pick up on things. They do pretty much everything to a pretty good level, right? I mean, if you've been a multi-year lead running back, unquestioned in the NFL, and Le'Veon Bell's done that times what, 3, 2.5, 3? I mean, it's a ridiculous run. I mean, that's the exact type of signing or acquisition that should scare any young running back that you have in Dynasty, at least for now. So for Le'Veon Bell, like, he played more than I was expecting. I think, just like Leonard Fournette, watch this on when they're going to have a blended approach of, we don't know if we're going to have to pick up a blitz, or we don't want to be defined by, we have to get Edwards-Helaire out in a route, which the more I watch, the more that's all he does. The more he does is he exits stage right, and it's on Mahomes. If someone gets free, there is no next line of defense. It's Mahomes running. It's Mahomes creating. It's not, let's just stone this guy with our running back. Le'Veon Bell can do that. Le'Veon Bell can offer both things. And that, to me, is going to be highly valuable in terms of, in certain situations, a lot of third and long set, like all these things where we may want our running back out in the route, but we may not. And I think he's going to get a ton of goal line. Whatever goal lines there are, I think he's going to get a lot of them. And aren't those some of the most valuable 2 settings for a running back? So Edwards-Helaire has been one that's sort of been a running back 2 type. Do you think this pushes him to, his start rate declines precipitously? Like, it's starting now, right? I mean, Le'Veon Bell, you would figure, is a lot more incorporated this next game than he was the week ago.
Yeah, I mean, but this is, what I'll say is, it's interesting to me is Kansas City has not used their running backs in pass protection, right? Like, going back to, that was the big knock on Kareem Hunt coming out, right? He's never going to see the field. He's just going to be, they're going to pull him on third downs. Well, he was running routes on 90% of his passing snaps. So it didn't really matter, right, what he could do pass blocking. It's kind of what they've done with Edwards-Helaire. So I'm not, that's just something that they've done that's a little bit different, that I wouldn't so much concern myself about in terms of how that profile is going to work out. It doesn't feel right. You can't feel good about this, right? If you took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I don't know as a strategic point what the takeaway is. I mean, this could happen to anyone. Maybe that's a takeaway. That these things, that situation, and let's not get past the fact that this situation was supposed to be historic, right? It's just this great situation you're coming into. I mean, again, I love Patrick Mahomes. Let's just run down his passing yards this year: 211, 302. 385, 236, 340, 225, 200. As it, you made this huge bet on this running back who's going to come into the system. I think that sometimes that we when we make those bets, it can be a little bit suspect, and that we don't understand the offense as well coming into the season as we will, right? And I think that we miss a lot of opportunities and sort of make these big bets based on immediate situation. And yeah, they have a good offense, but I mean, I just think that the process of coming into the season with him as being, he's going to be the beneficiary of this huge offense has really been, it's actually been pretty perverse. And if you saw some of the advanced analytics on the Bills game, for example, right, they actually goaded them into doing something less efficient. I don't know if you saw this, but they actually had forced a ton of third downs where Kansas City hadn't really played third downs. Like they're so effective on first and second down usually that they don't get a lot of third downs. They forced them to third down and put them in questionable situations more than most defenses, just because they goaded them into running the ball, right? Instead of giving up 8.2 yards per attempt via passing game, you're letting Clyde Edwards-Helaire run for 5, right? That's easy math. You just keep doing that. And it's funny because Kansas City's kind of gotten baited into it recently. So it's interesting that whole dynamic of this is going to be a high scoring offense. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it's still a really good offense, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire hasn't really benefited from it in the way we thought he would.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you think we're going to again, the Jets, I think, are an interesting scenario because they're probably going to be able to do whatever they want. And I mean, I don't know if that's going to be a test or, any sort of indication of the rest of the season per se. But let's say it's an opponent where they're not hyper favorites. Do you think in a given week that Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell are both going to be in that sort of running back 18 to 30 kind of prism? Or do you think that, what do you kind of see this being? What's going to be the trend in terms of who's the better, higher start rate guy? Who is the higher projection here at Footballguys? What's kind of your spidey sense say in a given week?
Well, it touches 9-6 in favor of Edwards-Helaire to Bell. So that's just this week. So I think that's a starting point. 53% of snaps to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 33% to Le'Veon Bell. So I don't feel great about it in terms of starting both of them. And they haven't done a ton of work to the running backs in the passing game, right? So I don't know, and if we're not sure on who's going to get passing and who's going to get goal line looks, right? It doesn't feel. I don't think the situation feels that great to start either one of them, to be honest with you. I think probably the bet is to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire because if I had to guess, I think he sees more volume. But I'm not sure I feel great about Bell. And this is something we've talked about a lot, which is, do we really think Patrick Mahomes is going to change who he is to focus a lot more on throwing the ball to running backs? I mean, is that really what we paid him $500 million to do? Not really. I don't think that is. And, people use the comp from Brian Westbrook, right? The Brian Westbrook comp from Andy Reid's time. Brian Westbrook was their best player for a while. And I mean, there's 3 guys at least on this Kansas City team that would be better than anyone outside of Terrell Owens that Brian Westbrook ever played with in Philadelphia. And he only played with Terrell Owens for, I think, a year or maybe 2, right? That scheme didn't really seem to be applicable to this offense. And because there's so many other weapons, I don't feel great about any of them. Right. And the interesting part is to dial it down to who would you feel best out of the 4 of them. Right. And I think any of the 4 of these guys that we've talked about, which is Bell, Edwards-Helaire, Fournette, and Ronald Jones, I think any of them, if there's an injury to the other one, I think to their teammate, I think have really high upside, right? So that's why I like a lot of Bell and Fournette, maybe not necessarily in lineups. I mean, it feels more of a break glass scenario for Bell, for example, to me. He would probably be the least confident I would have out of anyone starting right now.
Okay. What would be your exit for Le'Veon Bell if he pops for a game, but Edwards-Helaire is still healthy, or just right now on the prospect of, what if Bell is the 1A? Like, what do you think is you could get this in some leagues, but it's an aggressive sell proposition?
What do you think? What do you think on his odds of being a starter next year? And it's probably not in Kansas City, right? Like what
Right.
do you think the chance that he rehabilitates his offer is, right? And I think it rehabilitates his job. I think you really have to have a take on that. And that would be where I would start. Do we in 2021 think that he's going to get the keys to a job? I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Chad? Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think he's the type. So let's put him in the Adrian Peterson type camp of I have a hard time seeing Le'Veon Bell in a backfield that isn't basically an even split or better in his favor. I have a hard time seeing that. We basically haven't seen it to date. I don't think I'm a little more bullish on Bell's role for the rest of the season if you split out the Kansas City backfield. So I still stand by what I just said. So I think it's going to be an even split, or Bell is going to be the slight favorite there in terms of snaps, touches, whatever, viability, fantasy points per game, whatever. So basically, like Adrian Peterson, where we wanted to sort of write him off, or Frank Gore of like, oh, you bring in Frank Gore. Well, you don't bring him in to be nothing, to go sit on the bench, to be a player coach. So Le'Veon Bell, like if he's in the league, to me, it's relatively binary. And I have a hard time thinking I think he'll be 29 next year. I have a hard time thinking he's out of the league. So I would put the odds decently high that he is going to be in the league, and being in the league for me means he's going to have, Devonta Freeman's not a good example, but again, he was going to go to a spot where he was going to have a relevant role. And I think Le'Veon Bell would be similar in that if he signs with somebody, it's going to be to have Adrian Peterson, I don't think a lot of people thought he was going to have a big time role in the Lions offense. And he told Kieran Johnson, go sit over there. Maybe we'll come back around to you. And so I just think that for Le'Veon Bell, I would put pretty good odds that he's going to be somebody's 1A, 1B next year.
Arizona would be interesting. I'm just looking at some trades for him. Le'Veon Bell, and on the other side is N'Keal Harry in a third, right? Like you just talk about league winning upside in one of those trades and blah right. And the other side. And we're taking the Bell side there. Le'Veon Bell for Jonnu Smith is interesting. And there's some weird roster constructions there that might make that actually tilt towards Jonnu. Le'Veon Bell and Darren Fells for Will Fuller. That's an interesting one in terms of going from.
Well, that's like a later first, you'd figure, right? So that to me is the line. It's the later first that
in terms of valuation. Would you take the pick straight? If someone said, "Here, I'll give you a 110," and you can sort of lock that in, do you take that, or do you trying to see with like Will Fuller?
Right.
I sort of get your premise that he's a late first, but you and I don't think of him that way. Right. Like we think, okay, right. Yeah, he's about equivalent to a late first, but we think of him as much higher than that. Right. I mean, that's sort of what my thought would be in terms of, are we really saying that he's worth the late first? Or are we saying that he's worth Will Fuller, which we think's much higher?
Well, I think smartly, the late first is more insulated. I just think, from here till the trade deadline, and again, the trade deadline in Dynasty leagues is not too far off. So to be able to lock in something better, and then you're going to be tied into, just riding him out until, like you said, the off season, and now what is his future going to look like? So I just think from a pragmatic Dynasty perspective of value, getting a first next year, even one that looks late by the projection, which is probably what you would get, that to me is the prudent thing to do. Yes, he can tilt leagues, and yes, if Edwards-Helaire is out, again, can change the prospect of your close of season. But also, if you're sitting there right now and you're 3-4, there's the chance that you have Bell and you miss the playoffs entirely. So there's a lot of risk in holding Bell if you could get a first. And I think the pick is obviously more liquid than players, and you might seek players or just hold if you are contending with Bell right now. But if you're not contending, I think you pretty much have to take the pick, right?
Yeah,
to lock it in if you're looking ahead already to 2021 plus.
Yeah, and plus you get it liquid, right? So you can figure out ways to move up, down, right? You can do more things with that first round pick than you could with Bell owning him or rostering him. So that would be one thing. Let's put a fine point on it the other way. In terms of, let's just say that these guys are glorified one injury away guys, right? And that would be, maybe they're flex plays, maybe they're not, depending on sort of your roster construction, but sort of could be in that sphere. But in the event that the starter goes down, they have difference-making upside. Where do you sort of rank these two guys? Are they at top 5? Are they higher than that?
Oh, in terms of the injury spectrum?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do a matrix in terms of kind of tracking the running back depth charts and things like that. To me, they're both in tier 1. So, and tier 1 means high upside if there's an injury to the other guy, pretty much, and these are more, like you said, they're more committee-ish than some of the other ones. But, sort of, I mean, we saw what with Jamal Williams, right? This past week of, Aaron Jones is out. What does that look like? Well, to me, that's like a tier 1. It's a guy that it's hard. You got to be really good to not have that guy in your lineup, or it's shallow lineups in your format, etc. So that's sort of the prism, or Latavius Murray or Alexander Madison, even though he put up a stinkazoid, the week the chance he got. But it's sort of a projection. So that to me is kind of the zone, and I think tier 1 is where both of these guys reside. And I do like the flexibility, the fact that we have 4 running backs, and while none of them from this point forward may have, with nothing changing, a top, say, 16 projection on a given week, depending on buys, you still have 4 guys that could all be in lineups. And with buys and injuries and who knows what's going on, I mean, if you're flexing running backs and your flex is Fournette, I still think you still are capturing to speak your language, Jordan, you're capturing like 20 plus, 25 plus point possibilities within a strong offense. At least you have 2 strong offenses, and you have the possibilities of multi-touchdowns, which plenty of teams in the NFL just don't offer the same prism of usage and perfect storm in a given week type potential there.
Yeah, and how quickly things change, right? Last week we weren't sure what role Fournette has, and now apparently he's the lead receiving back on that team. And if we had sat here last week and with what Chase Edmonds would have been, I mean, now look how much his value has changed in terms of how he's perceived. I mean, these things can run, and they can run quickly into difference making. I mean, we've talked about the Damian Williams, right? The Mosterts, the Tim Hightowers, to go back a few years, right? These situations can all turn high impact quickly at this part of the season. So I think, if you're worried about them sort of for the long term, if you're in a contending and you're not getting that sort of that value we talked about with that attractive piece that we view as sort of mid first or first round rookie pick or something like that, don't run scared, right? Because all you need is a week or 2 of them to go to be 90+% start rate guys, and that can have a huge impact on your dynasty outcome.
This is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 26 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Reminder to subscribe, rate, and review on all your podcasting platforms, and make sure you are signed up for the Football Guys daily email update delivered from Joe Bryant, your daily guide to all your news and instant analysis. And you can go there by going to footballguys.com/free. And some of the news items tonight, you've got Des Bryant signing with the Ravens. You don't want to miss this. Mike Evans has been playing through an injury, certainly not healthy, and there's a lot of banged up parts to that Tampa Bay wide receiver core, including Chris Godwin. These are all things that you're just not going to miss. Every night you're going to get this email update, and it's just going to be a catch-all for things that you might have missed over the last 24 hours or so. We've already got some updates on Christian McCaffrey coming back, opening up his 21-day practice window, etc. So again, and it highlights, especially in the offseason, it highlights up until mid-July, it highlights a lot of the free content that you can get and just try out the site. Even if you do not want to sign up just yet, that entire offseason, you get a lot of content, especially after the NFL draft, of getting you ready for your dynasty, redraft, etc. seasons there as just part of the fire hose until you have to decide, do I want to subscribe or not? And a lot of your avenues and links are easily digestible through that daily email update. So I alluded to it in the news there, Jordan, but Mike Evans, is he the next in line of a veteran that's getting a lot of shade thrown their way? And you know what? It's not summer anymore, so the shade is less vital to cool yourself. So Mike Evans, couple clunker games in a row. We've seen that. AJ Green, Juju Smith-Schuster, previous guys that I put in the hand-wringing wide receiver group in terms of, but in the last 14 days, they haven't put up a monster game for me. Where do you stand on Mike Evans in terms of you got Antonio Brown coming in, but you do this week have Chris Godwin out of the lineup, so it could be a multi-week absence. It's at least 1 week that we know already. So a lot of moving pieces there, a lot of talent. We talked about the backfield a little bit, but Mike Evans was already being suppressed in especially, I think it was third round of Superflex startups in parts of the offseason. I got to imagine we're backing that up unless he has a strong finish to the season, and that's going to go even more in reverse once we get to the offseason.
I can't imagine that he's more expensive, or even, I mean, we'll see in terms of where he falls in the overall market. His value won't go up. How close to the same does it stay? I mean, it has the feeling right now it could be a multiple round drop. I saw someone advocating on Twitter this week that he was droppable, which is kind of laughable considering he's wide receiver 20 on the season. So let's keep it in perspective here about what we're talking about. We're talking about he's on a pace that no one has ever done before, right? In terms of top 24 seasons to start a career, and he's on pace to extend it. Right. So let's be honest about where we're at right now. Does this offense look unique and different than it has in prior years? I think so. But again, this is if we're thinking about knocking him hugely in terms of cost or in terms of rankings or anything like that, let's be honest with ourselves about the fact that they signed Antonio Brown to a 1-year deal. It's been a while since we've seen Antonio Brown be like on good behavior when cameras were around, and 2, like be able to sustain more than a week of practice without getting cut. Right. So in terms of making a big overreaction to Mike Evans, in terms of this Antonio Brown stuff, I'm not moving him. And is it a situation where, he's playing on a high ankle sprain, and this story is not new to us, right? We saw last year Kamara and
sounds like Devontae Adams a few years ago, does it not? Playing through the string of not healthy, and everyone assumes he's a bust.
Yeah, everyone just assumes he's not any good anymore, which is just kind of funny. And we've seen this, right? This is what happened the past 2 years with Barkley and Kamara, right? Where they came back too early. He had a high ankle sprain and didn't even miss a game. Right, I think played on short. Didn't he play on Thursday night after suffering a high ankle sprain on a Sunday? Like, the guy's awesome, right? In terms of resiliency, I'm not, and he's probably hurt, right? So I'm not super concerned long term. Does it take a little off his ceiling this year? Maybe, but I'm not. I don't think we can say that with any significant predictiveness. And if we do, what are we playing this for? Let's just boil it back down to WARP and AWARP and the things that actually matter. If he's a couple of points lower per game, is that really moving the needle all that much? And if we're going to dock him for that, aren't we really losing out on a really good long-term prospect? I get it's the season to put CeeDee Lamb and DK Metcalf over everyone because they've done it for like a 6-week sample where they've been the wide receiver 2 on their team. But I don't get, right, we're docking for some reason. We're docking Mike Evans for the same reason, I guess, which is kind of counterintuitive, but that's just me.
I have this premise. So this hypothesis, tell me if it could be right, it is right, or definitely wrong, and you're off your rocker. It feels like there's a lot more microwave stuff going on this in terms of opinions, takes, reactions, adjustments this year as opposed to previous years. Now, one premise I have is that, well, Chad, you think long term a lot with most of your roster spots, at least, not the back end, few or whatever, the churn ones, but that, hey, you haven't been in redraft, you haven't been in regular season mode in a while. Some might say it's been a year, but then the other one would be, you know what? The state of affairs, everything is kind of accelerating. It is 2020. There's a lot of things going on and a lot of reaction theater and a lot of just, again, people reacting strongly to many things. So I just wonder, is this maybe specific, or is it just, Chad, you don't remember redraft season and this is what it looks like?
I don't know if it could just be 2020, right? I mean, I
That's
was just
my
looking at this
guess.
tonight. Yeah, you just have people that are, they've got nothing else to do than overreact about what's immediately in front of them. And I get it. Like, we're drinking from a fire hose in terms of all of this stuff. We haven't gotten anything for months. And now we've got, like every sporting event you could imagine, right? It's amping up the senses. But, I just think about like this, like the CD Lamb thing. Like, you're looking at like CD Lamb, who, he's pretty good. We have him at wide receiver 18 on the season. It's a pretty good number for a rookie. But again, it's small sample size. We haven't even played half the season yet. Amari Cooper's wide receiver 5. And so we've got Amari Cooper, we've got CD Lamb going over Amari Cooper. It's just kind of, it's interesting in terms of he hasn't jumped him yet. And then we've got Tyler Lockett at wide receiver 2. And we've got DK Metcalf at wide receiver 13. And there's a big disconnect there in terms of value too. So again, both of those guys are up in the top 5 of dynasty rankings and are wide receiver 2s on their team right now. The same thing could be said for Justin Jefferson, right? I mean, so it's interesting where we are in terms of, I do think there's an overreaction going on, and I do think it's going to open up value on guys like Evans, right? And, I was just thinking about it like this week, like Kenny Galladay is going to be, if everyone's going to be overreacting to the immediacy, like, Kenny Galladay's had like a decent season. He was hurt, kind of slow start. Like, he's going to be a guy that's going to end up being a value just in the offseason because everyone's
just the older wide receivers guys in general, right? I mean, we talked about this. We talked about this the whole offseason of just like, it's the year of, it did feel like this a few years ago, but now it feels like, man, you can really, if you want to, have some specific targets and wait on wide receiver, from a team building perspective. And it feels like it's going to be like that, but maybe even more so this coming offseason. People going towards the incomplete or the promising young wide receiver profiles when you can wait a little bit. You can get Mike Evans even cheaper than before as your wide receiver 1. Keenan Allen's going to be cheap. A bunch, Juju Smith-Schuster, you can throw him in that bucket. A bunch of older guys. And we also talk about, adding start rate to wins over replacement. You got CD. I have CD Lamb right now on a per game basis at wide receiver 28. So that's the difference right there between, it's not like everyone was starting him every week. I mean, He has one of the lower start rates of the top 30 by my tracking. And like you mentioned, I mean, Amari Cooper, AWARP wise for me, is about 3x CD Lamb. I mean, CD Lamb has provided almost no impact this year. And yet you're going to put that, like you said, at an elevated price point of, if you want to get in now, bus has already left. Sorry, bus is gone. You got to run down and stop the bus driver. And the only thing that gets your attention is like a big overpay. So I just, to me, that's a tough one. I can get on board more with DK Metcalf and some of these others that if you want to buy high, I can get a little more on board. But not with CeeDee Lamb specifically. And I love how I don't know if this was intentional. You said after six, you said either 6 games or 6 good games, 6 weeks, something like that. And I thought that was pretty tongue in cheek if you intentionally meant it to not include this past week where he logged 3 drops and an open donut sized box score on the Cowboys who did not show up. And CeeDee Lamb was like, wow, it's like he's trying to set a record for drops.
But I was told that Amari Cooper was the one that was high variance. What's up with this narrative not sticking? I don't
They do say you're not supposed to overvalue wide receiver 2s in the NFL. So we were saying that with Michael Gallup, right? And now CeeDee Lamb is the new. You definitely don't want to overvalue wide receiver 3s. We know that for sure. I think everyone universally agrees on that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think we're in. And I'm not necessarily saying that, although I'm not due for an update until next week. I'll have to rethink it. But I have never had DK Metcalf ahead of Lockett because he's not been better than him at any point. And when I sort of look at it, I say, okay, well, we're looking in a couple year window here. I don't think Lockett's going anywhere. Right. And so, but I think it's creating a really interesting opportunity in terms of you're actually able to arbitrage. We talk about arbitrage, right? Which is, look at situations and try and get a player that is cheaper for, get something less or get something equal for a lesser price, essentially. Right. And so when you sort of look at that, like, all right, if I want to buy into Russell Wilson, I could take DK Metcalf at wide receiver 3, or I can take the actual leading target getter for Seattle and take him at wide receiver 13 or whatever and take a huge discount, right? We're going to see multiple of those this year. It's going to be really interesting in terms of how this all sets up in the offseason. I'm really interested in it because I think there's going to be value questions and value issues in this offseason that are going to be unlike any that we've seen really in recent years.
Yep, totally agree with that. And you know what? That's why we get the itch, right, Jordan? Like
Yeah.
we want to get back in that marketplace of ooh, new player value, new twists and turns here.
Let's fast forward the season. I got startups to do.
Exactly. Is it January yet? TikTok, people. Let's get to the NFL playoffs already. Let's discuss one more bigger picture player here. You mentioned him in passing. Chase Edmonds, I think, is pretty darn interesting from this one prism. So I'll set it up. I'll put it on the old the T-ball tee for you, and you can hit it in any direction you so choose. I will put out this requisite information though. Yes, he was a workhorse in college. In the NFL, he's had only 20. His season high for touches is 80. He could. I mean, people are projecting him to maybe get 80 in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So you've got that from he's never really had long-term usage. Secondly, he has one game in his career of more than 8 carries. It was that magical, I'm sure everyone can picture it, that game against the Giants last year where the Giants didn't show up. They didn't post at all. He had 150 total yards, 29 touches, 3 touchdowns. 2 of them were breakaways where it's like, are you trying to let him score? So he had that magical game. But we've seen it for one game in his whole career of more than 8 carries. So the two-prong thing is this a moment to explore that? Is this found money? And you say this could be a Mike Davis situation of, could be a couple games, could be 4 games, could be 6 games. I mean, there is upside potential from here, and he's one of those that you firmly held, and for this reason, to get set opportunity and to help my team win. Or do you sit and say, I got to at least test the market because relatively speaking, this isn't Latavius Murray. This isn't, Fournette or Bell or what. I mean, this isn't a known player that has been a NFL starter pretty much ever. This is an unknown scenario for Edmonds to walk into that he maybe doesn't remain healthy. Maybe they shift how their offense looks and it's even more pass and Kyler Murray centric because they don't have their empty carry guy in Kenyon Drake to slog away 15 plus times a game up the middle.
Yeah, I mean, this is a one that we've stashed, right? And this was a high level one. The question is now what do you do with it, right? I mean, that's essentially what you asked is what do you do?
And now it's Schrodinger's cat. This week it's Schrodinger's cat because he hasn't either had a big game, a small game, a medium game.
Right, and this matters a lot, right? Like the first week matters a lot. Andy Dalton, right? The first week, how these things go can have a big impact on, right? It's the primacy and recency effect. It's the first thing that we see and the last thing that we see have the biggest impact, right? This is going to be a big deal. I think he's got the ability to change leagues. I do. If you're going to give me a first plus for him, which I think is, I'm not going to say it's common, but I think it's attainable in the market. I think you got to think about it, right? And especially in a construct of, hey, he's going to be my running back 3, or he's going to be a flex play, something like that. And it's not that big of a gap or what I would go to a different player. Right? If I can get a first plus for that, I mean, that's pretty lucrative, right?
Well, we haven't said in this term, but man, when you have the leagues where you're starting like 4 starting NFL running backs, where it's a couple guys and then 2 flexes or flex centric, whatever it is, but you're going to win a lot of games. if your flexes are filled with unequivocal starting running backs, then you're going to pummel a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, what's the best case scenario, right? He goes on a Mostert like tear from last year, and we sort of get to the offseason and have like tepid optimism that he's going to be the starter in 2021, right? I mean, is that essentially where Raheem Mostert really the best case scenario for him? And it ended up being a pretty good case, right?
Or Eckler. I'm thinking of Eckler, of a guy that you maybe didn't think was going to be a lead guy, a little sub-sized, and then he just keeps playing, keeps getting more roles. And Edmonds, for what we have seen sample size wise, I mean, he has been an absolute, not revelation, but notably better than the guy getting more touches in that same backfield. Now he's being used differently. I think that is part of the equation. And one question I have is, will they use Edmonds? Like, will Edmonds' increased volume of touches, will it just go in, straight up the middle Kenyon Drake style, or are they going to kind of change and do more of what they did with Edmonds just to a higher level? Are they going to, turn it up to 11, or however the phrase goes, so that they do more of what they've been doing to optimize him? It would be my key question.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be I think the question that we have to find out. But what's been so fascinating with them, with Chase Edmonds in particular, has been the change in their passing game. And last year, I think it was 35-2, something to that effect, of targets to Kenyon Drake since when Kenyon Drake was in Arizona. I think it was 35-2, something about that, 17-1 ratio. And when you look now this year, and you look at what their splits are, it was actually 3-1 Edmonds to Drake. So the fact that changed as much as it did, I mean, that's a pretty eye-opening difference, right? Why would that change? What did they see there in terms of it changing? I don't know. And that gives me a couple of concerns, right? Are they going to A, change their offense around, and B, how much faith do you have in, even if Edmonds does it, that it's going to ever stay the same, right? So that's just a concern that I have. I think ultimately, like in a best case scenario, I still don't think he's got a lock on a 2021 job, even if he plays well.
Right. I agree with that.
So that's kind of how I feel on. I do think he's got one warp potential for the rest of the season. That's a big deal. So, and that's more than what a random future first round rookie pick would be over the next 3 years. So I do think that's in play too.
Yeah. And one warp, I mean, we talked about, I'm trying to think back if there was a guy last year we discussed in this fashion where it's sort of mid-season. It could be, again, could you get that perfect storm? I mean, I don't think Drake will be out for that whole duration. Now, could he have an aggravation? I think the biggest variable that people tend to under calculate is the part that you have players. Now, Mike Davis has been a notable exception. That, I mean, he's been pushing through big volume, and never really had it, to this point. And he actually got to the NFL fringe and came back from it. But when you get players, and I think it was on, I don't know, it was a podcast I heard last week or two, but they were referencing that, backups, you really don't know how they're going to react. That typically they're backups for a reason, and their backups, part of it could be just they don't think they're going to hold up, and running back is a good example of that. But if Chase Edmonds, there is no guarantee that if they wanted to give him Mike Davis, like he got 20 plus touches for 3 weeks in a row, I believe. I mean, do a lot of backups that don't really, it's not like we're talking about a second round pick with prototypical traits and all these things. Like, how many hold up under that increased usage just right away? And I kind of liken it. I mean, you're a biker, for anyone that does any physical activity. Cycling. Biking is for motorcyclists. But
I'd fall off one of those things.
but if you just think of whatever physical or sport or whatever that you do to our recreational levels, that if you were to really up the screws on that, how long would you be able to withstand before you had to, before you needed a break, before you hurt yourself, whatever? And thinking about in that prism, I think if you put that onto, yes, they're athletically far superior, but it's within their same scope, that it's still within their universe of possibilities. So, if you're used to running, I don't know, 20 miles a week, and now you're going to go 70 miles. Well, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And a lot of things are going to start changing in your body. Could go fine. You could be highly adaptive to that. But, day 3, when you're trying to up your mileage like that of this new thing, I mean, that's it. You could just break. And I need to take 2 weeks off. So I have a little bit, again, I like Chase Edmonds, the player. I agree that this is high leverage because, again, it fritters away. And like if you said, if you can get a first or first plus, that all goes away with an injury. We saw that moment in time. Wayne Gallman, right? Last year, he had this little window where you could, I want to say you could probably get a higher second, maybe a second and a player, or maybe second to first upgrade, something like that. And then he gets hurt that first game out and it all goes away and never coming back. So Chase Edmonds, if he has first plus potential, or all of a sudden a rookie that was going in the first round, and you can transition to that player, then I think you have to be open to that and really assess, if Edmonds hits, how much does that really help me? And I'm not going to say the answer is nothing or the answer is not much, but really assess where you stand. Because if you're a team that you're sitting here and maybe you have McCaffrey and or Nick Chubb, or like you have reinforcements coming back and you're a good team otherwise, and you're like, even if Edmonds is good and he's healthy and he gets 3-4 starts in a row, I may start him once or twice at most. Like, is it worth the risk? I'm probably not starting him over all these guys per se. So really assess that part, because it could be a clarified decision of he's a glaring sell, or I'm going to ride him. This is what I have him for. And a late first selling him to somebody else that's probably contending in my competitor just isn't worth it. But again, I think you need to be more open to selling than like, oh, well, I have them, so I have to hold them.
Yeah, one trick I would have in the playbook too is instead of, if you have multiple firsts, right, the way to actually get the best out of that trade is to trade Chase Edmonds for a pick 2 years from now, because you're not playing into him for this year, right? And the odds that he's going to sustain someone down the stretch of next season are pretty low historically. So that's actually how you capture that trade, the highest value of it. But I'm sort of with you on how how there's I think it's team dependent on what you do with it, right? I think it's team dependent for sure in terms of how your team constructs together.
Yep, that's a great point. And once again, you need everything Footballguys provides. One resource that I have talked about 3 or 4 times in the last couple of months is the My Footballguys section of the site. Basically, it syncs all your leagues in there. It highlights the players you have, the players that are available on your waiver wire, setting your lineups. Huge time saver if you're in, like most dynasty owners, dynasty players. If you are in, I would say, more than a couple of leagues, again, just going in, having this by your side when you're doing waivers on a weekly basis, setting your lineup. It also has the league dominator function that you can have it to suggest trades that help your team, etc. So many key aspects through the My Footballguys integration that it offers. And that's, again, powered by David Dodds and his great projections, as well as the rest of the staff, and just a number of things that drive into making those recommendations on a weekly basis. So you're getting great results, but you're also saving time, which again, if you're in a bunch of dynasty leagues, you want both of those things, especially the time saving aspect. If you can turn 40 minutes into 15 minutes setting your waivers, all the better, because now you can get on to evaluating your players, exploring a few more trade avenues in a given week. All right, so that is going to do it for us this week. We discussed a few of the critical backfields. We discussed the player value landscape changing overall in this episode. We're about halfway through the regular season and a few more weeks for dynasty trading. We're going to get into that more in the next couple of weeks as that trade deadline looms, and you're getting more and more data points to saying, am I a contender or am I a non-contender? And those requisite moves that we can recommend in the coming weeks. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty league.